In this video we are going to show you how to carry out the routine maintenance on an RTA 58T piston and piston rod gland box. The main piston, the piston rings and the stuffing box are engine parts which sustain wear and all of which should have maintenance every 6,000 to 8,000 hours of operation. The descriptions of the operating functions are found in the operating manual. Maintenance instructions are to be found in the maintenance manual. At the beginning of the working sheets, you will always find a list of tools with the appropriate code numbers. From these code numbers, you can find the corresponding tool at the end of the maintenance manual. Please read carefully all the pages in both manuals that are referred to in the course of the video. Always use the appropriate tools and make sure that everything is absolutely clean when reassembling. Adhere to the instructions. Reliability of the engine and economical fuel consumption are dependent upon good maintenance. After shutting down the engine as indicated in the operating manual, further preparations have to be made before work on the piston can be started as follows. Close the starting air shutoff valve. Open the indicator cocks. Engage the turning gear. Finally, close the exhaust valve air spring main air supply. The cylinder cooling water of the corresponding cylinder must be drained according to the instructions given in the maintenance manual. First, close the cylinder cooling water outlet valve. Next, close the cylinder cooling water inlet valve. Finally, open the cylinder cooling water drain valve of the corresponding cylinder. Now we disconnect all the pipes which are attached to the cylinder head and exhaust valve cage. Protect all pipe connections from dirt and damage. Special care has to be taken with the oil connections and oil pipes in order to avoid any dirt ingress. Carefully remove this insulation piece and if it is still hot, protect your hands with gloves. Next, we remove all screws which are holding the expansion piece except the last one. The expansion piece will be removed with the help of this lifting device, also provided with the engine tools. The fuel injection pipes are disconnected here. Here, the fuel distributor block must only be disconnected from the cylinder head. Finally, the starting air pilot and starting air supply pipes are disconnected. This flange must be prised back with a bar to prevent fouling when lifting off the cylinder head. Slacken only the lower flange. Thereafter, the contained oil will be drained from the high pressure pipe through the double pipe ring area by lifting it slightly from its lower sealing seat. Consult the maintenance manual on this point. Before placing the hydraulic pre-tensioning device on the cylinder head, make sure that the stud threads and the contact surfaces for the jacks are clean and intact. Refer to the maintenance manual under the section Hydraulic Pre-tensioning Jacks. Mount the two halves of the hydraulic pre-tensioning device over the cylinder head studs and rest them on the cylinder head. Interconnect all the hydraulic jacks with the hoses as indicated in the maintenance manual. Open now the release valve at the high pressure pump. Make sure that the quick couplings of the high pressure hoses are properly locked. The round nuts belonging to the hydraulic pre-tensioning device have previously been smeared slightly with Molykote paste G, screwed on and tightened with the help of the Tommy bar until the clearance of X is very little or zero. Consult the maintenance manual on this point. This piston reset device can also be used for easier resetting of the pistons as shown in figure C. Refer to the maintenance manual on this point. Do not forget that when slackening, the round nuts must be turned back by about 1.5 turns. Otherwise, the round nuts cannot be removed. Consult the maintenance manual again. Please remember to follow all safety precautions when using hydraulic equipment, especially the use of safety goggles. Remember, protect your eyes. Start the high pressure pump and keep the vent screws open until the oil emerges without air bubbles. Raise pressure to about 1020 bar so that the round nuts can be slackened with the help of the Tommy bar. While loosening, attention should be paid so that the control pin of the pre-tensioning jacks always protrude slightly above the upper edge of the piston. Finally, turn the cylinder head nuts back about 2 turns and release the pump pressure. All hydraulic equipment can now be removed from the cylinder head. The cylinder head is ready to be lifted off. With this lifting device, also included in the engine tools, the cylinder head can be lifted off. Check once more that all necessary pipework has been disconnected or taken away before lifting off the cylinder head. Now we carefully lift the cylinder head from the engine together with the water guide ring. Make sure that the cylinder cover is set down above a gallery support, as close to the engine as possible and on a soft underlay. Before lifting out the piston, the so-called wear ridge must be removed. When grinding or milling, make absolutely sure not to damage the running surface used by the piston rings and see that no grinding residues get between piston and liner. To do this properly, we strongly recommend this special milling device. It figures in the list of tools as a recommended item. Look up the maintenance manual on this point. Take great care not to damage the running surface in the cylinder liner bore. Consult the maintenance manual again. If the depth of the lubricating grooves has worn to less than 1.5 mm, new depth 2.5 mm, redress them to their original depth and slightly chamfer their edges with an oil stone or similar. Refer to the maintenance manual. The shape of the scavenge ports shown in this picture corresponds to new cylinder liners. If the condition of the edges requires reconditioning, depending on the degree of wear or damage, aim at matching these shapes. Look up the maintenance manual. Whenever a working piston is removed for overhaul, the cylinder liner bore has also to be measured. The measurements have to be taken in both longitudinal and transverse directions in relation to the engine axis. The figures found are to be recorded so that they can serve as comparison with earlier or later measurements. Comparisons with other measurements can, however, only be made if the measurements are always taken at the same place. For this reason, use the measuring gauge, which is part of the toolkit. Consult the maintenance manual on this point. Note, the inside micrometer must have the same temperature as the cylinder liner in question. Adjust the height of the measuring gauge with the screw S so that the second measuring point coincides exactly with the position of the top piston ring at top dead center. Consult the maintenance manual on this point. Before the piston can be lifted out, the piston rod must be disconnected from the crosshead. The engine is therefore turned until a corresponding crank assumes the bottom dead center. Now we are going to slacken the bolted connection between the piston rod and the crosshead. Place both pre-tensioning jacks crosswise over the wasted studs and screw them on completely with open vent screws. Look up the maintenance manual under the section Hydraulic Pre-tensioning Jacks. Take care not to forget that when slackening, the hydraulic jack must be turned back by about half a turn. After connecting the high pressure hoses, turn the jacks on until the distance at X is very little or zero. To do this, the drain valve at the high pressure pump must be kept open. Look up the maintenance manual. Start the high pressure pump and keep the vent screws open until the oil emerges without air bubbles. Raise pressure to about 1020 bar so that the nuts can be slackened with the help of the Tommy bar. While loosening, see that the control pins of the pre-tensioning jacks always protrude slightly above the upper edge of the piston. Look in the maintenance manual regarding this subject. Finally, turn the nuts back about one turn. As mentioned before, the same procedure is to be applied for loosening the other two wasted studs. After the pump pressure has dropped, the pre-tensioning jacks and also the 4 round nuts are removed. Screw on both distance holders to the piston rod foot. The two distance holders will push the gland box to a higher level so that the scraper rings do not get damaged by the piston rod wear ridge. Consult the maintenance manual again. For safety reasons, the inner screws on the two-part ring must not be loosened and removed at this juncture. After loosening and removing the outer gland box screws, the corresponding crank is turned carefully to top dead center. The gland box is now consequently pushed out by the two distance holders from its seating in the cylinder jacket. At top dead centre, some water is poured into the holes to soften up their deposits. With this special tap at top dead centre, the combustion residues are removed from the threaded holes in the piston crown. After mounting the suspension device to the piston crown, the piston is ready to be lifted out of the liner. Before pulling the piston completely out, the crosshead pin and the top end bearing must be protected so the entry of dirt is absolutely prevented. Lower the piston into the supporting device designed for this on the middle platform. Look in the maintenance manual regarding this operation. Now remove the two distance holders from the piston rod foot. Fold the two hinge covers down again and lower the piston until the gland box housing comes to rest on the two hinged covers. First, remove these two locking screws and locking plates. Lower the piston further until the piston rod head rests on the upper supports. To remove the piston rings from the ring grooves, use only the piston ring expander intended for the engine type and piston diameter in question. Look up the maintenance manual again. Expand the piston rings only sufficiently to allow removal over the piston crown. Note, unnecessary strain on the piston rings must be strictly avoided. Mark the rings so that if they are used again they can be fitted in the same groove and in the same position. When cleaning pistons, take special care to ensure that all combustion residues are removed from the piston ring grooves. An old piston ring segment prepared by grinding would be a suitable tool for this purpose. After cleaning, inspect the entire piston thoroughly, but especially the grooved part. The chromium layer on the ring grooves must not be damaged or worn. Defective piston ring grooves can be reconditioned by firms specialised in this work. Such reconditioning work may only be carried out by specialised Wärtsilä NSD reconditioning centres. Every time a piston is taken out, the piston top surface contour must be checked. This is done with this checking template and with the feeler gauge. The template is placed on the topmost piston ring and rotated around the piston axis. Where, however, burn scars exceed 10 mm, the original material thickness must be restored by surface welding or replacement of the piston crown. Finally, we must decide which piston rings may be used again. For this purpose, the piston rings are measured radially at the points A, B and C. Consult the maintenance manual again. Used piston rings may continue in service until the next overhaul, provided the minimum ring width is assured at all of these 3 points. Usually the top 2 rings are replaced at every piston overhaul. In the maintenance manual you will find a diagram which, together with the previous recorded liner and piston ring wear, will help you to establish the minimum acceptable ring width. On this graph, mark the largest cylinder liner diameter measured on the abscissa. On the ordinate, the smallest piston ring width measured. If the operational behaviour and overhaul intervals remain unchanged, it is possible to estimate whether the ring will last until the next overhaul. An example is given in the maintenance manual. For refitting of used and new piston rings, follow strictly the instructions in the maintenance manual. When refitting used piston rings, be sure to fit them in the same grooves as before. The piston rings must be fitted with the marking top facing upwards. Check all dimensions of piston and piston rings, compare it with the values stated in the clearance table and record them. The clearance between piston ring and groove must not exceed the maximum value stated in the clearance table. Otherwise the ring, the piston crown or both must be replaced. Read this up in your maintenance manual. At every piston overhaul, the piston rod gland box must also be dismantled and inspected. Excessively worn or damaged parts must be replaced. First, we remove the 4 screws with locking plates from the split housing. Thereafter, the 2 gland housing halves are pulled away from the piston rod. After a preliminary cleaning, the piston rod gland box is stripped down completely for inspection. Protect the piston rod against any damage caused by the springs. On the following parts, wear has to be measured with suitable instruments. Check all dimensions of the scraper rings, oil scraper rings and sealing rings, compare it with the value stated in the clearance table and record them. Wearable parts approaching the tolerance limit should be replaced in doubtful cases, as they cannot be checked again before the next piston overhaul. The piston rod gland box is now reassembled in the reverse order. Use the 2-part clamp ring and tapered ring to facilitate easier fitting of the various gland ring springs. Look up the maintenance manual on this point. Place all ring groups with the locating pin pointing upwards. Make sure that the locating pin of the respective ring group always fits into the upper ring recess. Fit the tensioning spring onto the tapered ring. Now push the spring over the tapered part of the device into the respective ring groove. Check up the correct location of the respective ring groups. In the same way, fit all tension springs and rings of the remaining ring groups. With these two gauges placed here, the scraper rings, oil scraper rings and sealing rings are adjusted in such a way that each ring set comes to rest at the height of the respective ring groove in the gland housing. Consult the maintenance manual on this point. Carefully push both housing halves against the piston rod and screw them together with the 4 screws and corresponding locking plates. Use only locking plates in perfect condition. Check the function of the cylinder oil pump at every piston overhaul. Turn its hand crank until oil emerges at all lubricating points of the respective liner. The piston overhaul has been completed and the piston is now ready for refitting. Lavishly smear the piston rings, piston skirt, piston rod and the running surface in the cylinder liner with bearing oil. This inserting cone must be well oiled before fitting the piston. As a general rule, rubber rings should always be replaced. Arrange the piston rings so that their gaps alternate by 180 degrees to each other. Turn the piston exactly in position so that the piston rod foot enters without jamming into the centering pins of the crosshead. Slowly lower the piston further until the piston rod foot has arrived just above the crosshead pin. The corresponding crank should be now at top dead centre. Secure the piston rod with one nut before turning the engine to the bottom dead centre. Now slacken the crane rope and remove the suspension device. Turn the crank carefully to bottom dead centre and direct the insertion of the piston rod gland into its seating bore in the cylinder jacket. Centre the gland box and screw down until it seats. Firmly tighten and secure all screws fastening the gland housing. Turn the engine further until the corresponding crank reaches the bottom dead centre. Loosen and remove the distance holders from the piston rod foot. For later checks, mark the position of the stud nuts against the seating surface with a felt tip pen. Place both pre-tensioning jacks crosswise over the wasted studs and screw them on completely with open vent screws. Make sure that the quick couplings of the high pressure hoses are properly locked. Open the drain valve at the high pressure pump and screw the pre-tensioning jack completely on. Check now the distance X. There should be no or very little clearance. Look up the maintenance manual. Start the high pressure pump and keep the vent screws open until the oil emerges without air bubbles. In the first step, raise pressure to 600 bar and keep it constant. Pay attention during the complete tightening procedure that the control pin always protrudes slightly above the upper edge of the piston. Thereafter, tighten the stud nuts with the help of the Tommy bar until firmly seated. Release the pressure to zero, screw the pre-tensioning jacks onto the other two wasted studs, and repeat this sequence as described previously. Consult the maintenance manual on this point. In the second step, the wasted studs must be tensioned again diagonally with 1000 bar. Subsequently, raise pressure to 1000 bar and keep it constant. Thereafter, tighten the stud nuts with the help of the Tommy bar until firmly seated. Check the nut seatings with the feeler gauge through the control slot in the jacks. Look up the maintenance manual again. After the other two studs have been tightened, also in the same way, Check whether the nuts have been turned by about the same angle of 70 degrees. Compare now the nut rotation with the marks made previously. Before fitting the cylinder cover, the following points are to be noted. New rubber rings of the specified size and quality are to be fitted on the cylinder liner. These sealing surfaces must be clean and intact. Always use a new soft iron ring 2 mm thick. Coat the rubber rings and the contact surfaces with engine oil. Should this ball seat be damaged or in bad condition, it may be repaired with the help of this special milling and lapping device. Look up the maintenance manual on this procedure. Before fitting the cylinder head, make sure there is no foreign matter or dirt left in the combustion chamber. Take care not to damage the stud threads. Coat the stud threads and nut contact surfaces with Molykote paste G. All nuts are now tightened until they are firmly seated. For later checks, we make a reference mark with a felt tip pen. Similarly, for loosening, the hydraulic pre-tensioning jacks are now mounted on the cylinder cover for tightening. After connecting the hoses, open the release valve at the high pressure pump so that their pistons can be pushed back into the starting position. Next, tighten all jack nuts firmly. Check the distance X, it should be nil or of very little clearance. Consult the maintenance manual again. After all jacks have been vented, the pressure is raised to 1000 bar and held constant. Make sure that these control pins above the jacks are always protruding during the tightening procedure. Finally, all nuts are firmly tightened with the help of the Tommy bar. Before releasing the pressure, check with the feeler gauge that the nuts are in proper contact. Now verify that all nuts have been turned through roughly the same angle from the reference mark made previously, about 380 degrees. If you find angle differences, the reason must be sought and the whole tightening procedure repeated. Now we reconnect all the pipes in the reverse order. The expansion piece has to be fitted in such a way that the internal protection pipe of the expansion piece is pointing in the gas flow direction. The arrow indicates the correct orientation. Lightly smear the expansion piece connecting screws with a heat-resisting lubricant. The pressure pipe flange shall be screwed to the pressure pipe in such a way that after tightening all screws crosswise, the clearance X is parallel and amounts to about 3 mm. Check it with the feeler gauge. look up the maintenance manual on this point. After all pipes have been reconnected, we restore the engine to the original conditions. Close the cylinder cooling water drain valve. Open the cylinder cooling water inlet and outlet valves. Open the exhaust valve air spring supply again. Start the oil, water and fuel booster pumps. Finally, all connections must be checked to ensure that they make a complete seal against any water, oil and fuel leakage. Before starting the engine, follow strictly all indications in the operating manual stated under preparations before taking into service. Every time after the exhaust valve high pressure pipe has been involved in an overhaul, check while the engine is running if the flange connections of the hydraulic pipes are free of leakage. This is done by removing the screw plug behind the actuator pump. No oil must flow in this oil leak control bore. The piston has been fitted with new piston rings, and these need running in without fail. Running in will ensure that the piston rings seal as quickly and effectively as possible. Therefore, follow strictly the running in instructions and the running in program in the operating manual, as well as the indications in the corresponding service bulletin. If you have any questions about the subject of this film, or indeed about any aspect of the operating and maintenance of Sulzer diesel engines, please contact your nearest Wärtsilä NSD representative. We shall be happy to be of assistance.